Hello and welcome to the New City Podcast, where we exist to renew the Quad Cities by restoring the health of its people. I am Jarek Bakken.
I'm Dr. Alex Aguelo.
And today we've got, number 7. 7 of 15 in our series on the New City Principles of Health. Principle of today: human body needs to move in order to survive and thrive. And most people probably think this is the only thing that the gym should be talking about. So great. About time, 7 episodes in, that we finally start talking about it. Is that true? First of all, do you think people think we're out of our lane by talking about all the stuff we talk about?
I've never really thought about that.
I suppose you're a doctor, so that
maybe other gym owners think that would be.
Do you think
wrong to do?
Yeah, whatever. Maybe I'm overthinking that. But today we're talking about the one thing that it's probably like completely justified more than anything that we should talk about. So, human body needs to move. Let me ask you this: You were a chiropractor and a health enthusiast, before ever being even introduced to CrossFit.
Mm-hmm.
How did you come about, like, the understanding that, movement's really important for overall health, like, in a way that's different than how most people understand, I should probably exercise?
Yeah. I don't know that I've ever thought about that, but one of the first things I thought of when you said that is, so when I was in chiropractic school and just kind of learning what I now know about health, kind of the beginnings of all of that, I already had these categories in my mind of, stress and rest and toxicity and, of course, nutrition and exercise would be in them. But if I looked at the things that I was focusing on, the worst part of my health would have been exercise,
Really?
Would have been movement, because growing up, I was an athlete, so of course I exercised just being an athlete, but I hated training. I hated working out, and I hated practice. So I kind of just demonized it in my mind. So I never really worked out. In college football, we would have to, especially in the off season, lift weights, and I would go and hide somewhere in the gym so I wouldn't have to exercise. So that was the worst part of my health. So I had to just be really intentional about doing it. Where I started to understand more, other than just a basic understanding that exercise is important for your health, because back then I thought how most people think now of basically health is all about how much you weigh. So either you're healthy if you're healthy if you're skinny, you're sick if you're fat. So then, of course, if you don't want to be fat, you exercise type thing. But so within chiropractic, there's just different theories of why chiropractic works and how it actually impacts physiology. And one theory is, and it's the same guy that we kind of somewhat ripped off our basic principle of give the body what it needs and stay away from what it doesn't. He basically says all disease comes down to toxicity and deficiency. Mm-hmm. So if you have too much of something your body doesn't need, you're going to be sick. If you don't have enough of what your body does need, you're going to be sick. And he would say that movement is one of those things that your body needs. So you could have what's called movement deficiency syndrome. So if your body isn't moving properly, then you're going to set off what's called stress physiology. You'll get into that fight or flight state, and we can get into this a little bit more detail later. But then he related that to chiropractic. Basically, his understanding of chiropractic is when your spine's out of alignment and when it's not moving properly, now you set off that stress response in your body and all kind of health issues happen. So taking that understanding at a spine level and taking that, if that lack of movement there at just a specific joint means your stress response happens. Well, what if your whole body's not moving?
Right.
And now that's going to set off that stress response. So that's when I really started to understand, movement is extremely important for the human body. Which then still kind of led me to, now I need to exercise, which is when I kind of stepped my foot into CrossFit and got into all of that. But then over the years of really just understanding the importance of all movement, not just, exercising 60 minutes a day type thing.
Yeah, I mean, because we have 3 kind of principles in this category of movement, and when we say the human body needs to move, this is way bigger than exercise, right? The other two principles have a lot more to do with exercise than this one does. Like, this is much more of that bigger umbrella over top of the things that, okay, now, yes, like, in what we're going to get to today is, okay, how did exercise really become like a primary answer to this problem that we're experiencing? But really what we're seeing here with movement is like a much more global statement that like the human body's not meant to be still.
Right. I mean, you just from a basic biological perspective, I'm going to have to remember now, I think there's 7 signs of life to determine if something is actually alive, and movement is one of them. So if something doesn't move, then it's actually not alive. So that kind of gets down to the basics of the body has to move in order to survive and thrive. You aren't surviving if you're not moving. And that goes for the body as a whole, but then you can even just kind of go down to from a system standpoint. So there's specific systems in your body start to go awry if you're not moving. Organs start to go awry if you're not moving, and even down to the cellular level, your cells start to function abnormally if you're not moving. So it's a big deal. So understanding what is actually meant by movement is extremely important if you want to be a healthy person.
Yeah, right. So, unfortunately, we have a problem.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we actually have to talk about this.
Right.
We have to bring awareness to the fact that, hey, we do need to move, and what is normal right now is actually not good and not healthy because people generally don't move very much.
No, I mean, and that's what the statistics show. I think it's like, I can't remember the actual date, but sometime during when the Industrial Revolution started, the jobs, I think it's over 90% used to be active, right? People were farming. People were, had to do heavy labor jobs, working in coal mines, those type of things. Now it's less than 4% of jobs are considered active. Majority of jobs are sedentary. People are sitting down in front of their computer, that type of stuff. So it's just not part of life. It's not part of culture, really, especially in our country, to move throughout the day. When you compare that to how people lived for thousands of years, people were moving the majority of their days. They were moving to prepare food. They were moving to hunt for food. They were moving to farm for food. It was kind of all based off of just survival in general.
Right.
They had to be active throughout their day. So when things started to become more industrialized, there was a change there that happened. And we've had this conversation. It's not completely just based off of when people started farming. There's somewhat of an argument of people are like, well, when we were just hunting and gathering for our food, not that we even believe that we were ever just doing that. But then they say, well, when we started farming and we started settling and not moving around, being nomads, and that's when everything started to go wrong. But people were still moving actively throughout their day when they were farming, when they were herders, those type of things. But as things did change and become more and more industrialized, people started to become less and less active. Probably the biggest statistic that I would say shows that is obesity. Not that, again, movement is all about how much you weigh, but obesity is a sign, it's a marker to say we're not moving. We're primarily sedentary. And that's up to over 70% of our country is overweight, and up to almost 40% is obese. So that's a lot of people who are not moving.
Right. And just to continue to just paint this picture of kind of how we've gotten here, because I think people are aware of that problem. They're aware, whether it's with themselves, they feel overweight, they feel like, oh, I'm not physically who I should be. At minimum, they have people surrounding them that they see this firsthand, right? If they don't even know about statistics, like you're saying, like, hey, there's a big problem going on here.
Right.
But to dig in deeper to how we got here, like wrapped up in this, just the entire process of what we would call industrialization as the demands of life. So a lot of things that have become industrialized become systematized and organized and like, become really efficient at doing jobs that used to take, a person lots of hours and lots of work to do, right? Have like the production has skyrocketed. Right? And efficiency is one of the ways it's done that, which has left a smaller demand for people, right? There's less human input that needs to go into this system from a physical standpoint.
Yeah.
More human input that needs to go in from a cognitive standpoint. Mm-hmm. People need to think a lot more about how this super complex system works, whether it's agriculture or literally anything else, right? There's a lot of thought that goes into it. Heck, even running a gym that's primarily about people moving their body, right? Like, because of the way that we have chosen to industrialize things and live life in cities together and relying on all these different super complex systems, it requires a lot of thought work versus the physical work that, was once required to get your food, to build your house, to make your clothes, right? To make tools, to do these other jobs with, right? Like, that's kind of what life was. We've now made these great systems to be super efficient with all of this stuff, but now the work is not the same.
Right.
The work is, what can I do with my brain to think about how to do these things differently? And there's less physical work for people to do. And so you made fun of me yesterday for reading a book about women and finding their purposes and stuff, but it's like this whole picture of like the housewife thing, right? When the housewife didn't have to, like figure out how to make the food and make the clothes and all of this stuff, right? Her purpose just kind of like got stripped.
Sure.
And life became boring, right? And so, like, without these things to do, there's this gap and there's this void, right?
Right.
And it's not to say that, like, there's not tons and tons and tons of good that has happened from industrialization, but it's like we've been living in this long enough to now start to see, like, ooh, we didn't see that negative outcome, like, when we started to do this, right? And unfortunately, one of the things is, like, industrialized life is a sedentary life.
Yep.
And we can't just let that happen. We have to now put more active input into that system to come out and kind of course correct. Right.
Yeah, we would never want to say that the things that have been made more efficient was a negative or a full, completely negative, but it's with that good, we have neglected things that I guess we just didn't see the full benefit of the way we were doing things, primarily from a physical health perspective.
Right.
So when things became more efficient and allowed us to get to be more productive, really, and I would say, because it's just in alignment with our principles, to be able to enjoy things, more things, more people to enjoy things more. We neglected, okay, well, what is that? What are the negative consequences of that, and how can we mitigate those?
Right. So it's like, on one hand, you think about the guy who has to be out in the fields working all day and working all night and putting in long, grinding hours. And it's like, oh, one of the things he probably doesn't have much time for is like leisure with his family, right? Mm-hmm. But instead of making things more productive and efficient to create more space for something like that, we just created a greater demand for work to be done.
Right.
So it's like, okay, and then we dial back and look at, okay, what did like the family structure look like in that? It was like business was a family affair.
Right.
It's not like you were missing out on things, like your whole family was in the business of butchering or farming or, whatever it might be.
Right.
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 So it's like we've just kind of created new problems.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So this industrialized life has kind of bred a people who are obese and sick and tired in general, but I think also tired of being sick and overweight.
Yeah.
Right? What are those are like the external factors that we can see. What is happening to us internally when we live in this like sedentary state?
Well, there's a number of different directions we could go there. I think, are you asking like what is happening, like what sort of physical problems are happening leading to internally?
It's easy for us to see like loss of function, right? It's easy for us to see that like, hey, I have too much stored body fat, right?
Yeah.
But I think people, even in those things, most people are still locked into this, like, this body composition is this direct tie to health.
Right.
Right? When we understand health as being much, much, much bigger than body composition, right? We know that, having a lower body fat percentage is not really a good, like, it's a small marker of health, right? It's a marker of not having certain aspects of unhealth, but it's like, it's a very, very, very limited picture of what is tied up into a human being being healthy, right?
Right.
In the same way that just looking at somebody's outward appearance in terms of, okay, maybe they're on the other end of the spectrum and they are storing a lot of body fat. Also, like, okay, yeah, like that's not good for them, right?
Right.
But like there's a ton of internal environment that's happening as a result of this lifestyle. I think a lot of people just aren't even aware that, oh, those things are a part of this too.
Right. Yeah. So I think probably the easiest way to understand this is when you look at, so we would want to talk about health again, we talk about surviving and thriving. So we don't really want people to just survive. We want them to thrive in their health. And that's kind of why we came up with these principles to say, well, here's kind of your baseline. Here's something to look at. Are you following these particular principles? If you are and it's going well, then thriving is going to happen. But most people understand health with, do they just not have sickness? Do they just not have a disease? So if you look at all the things that people want to prevent, like heart disease and cancer and diabetes and Alzheimer's, those are kind of the top four
leading causes of death.
Yeah, leading causes of death and just leading causes of sickness and disability, even those type of things. Nobody wants those things. So if you distill all of those things down to kind of one cause of what happens in the body internally that leads to those things, that would be inflammation. So if your body is inflamed, then that leads to all of these negative consequences that eventually get diagnosed as some sort of big disease, when some of those diseases can be terminal. So we want to try to avoid, and when I say inflammation, I said it in a way that people would think, well, inflammation is bad. Inflammation is not bad. It's a normal process the body goes through. It's required for any sort of healing. So like think about what we do in the gym. We kind of tear up our muscles. When we recover, there's inflammation that happens when we tear up our muscles. And then through that inflammatory process, the body heals and the body gets better, right? That's what we want to happen in life. That's a huge part of actually growing and getting healthier. We don't want chronic inflammation. We don't want the inflammatory processes to be always on in our body. Because if that's the case, then that's what leads to all of these chronic diseases, degenerative diseases. So when your body's not moving, they know at a physiological, even at a cellular level, that these pro-inflammatory processes turn on. So kind of how your genes work is they can either be turned off or turned on, or they're more active or less active based off of your environment that you put them in. So think of the environment of two options, not moving and moving. If you're in a moving environment, the the genes that you want that are good for your health are kind of more active or turned on. If you're in that sedentary category, then the genes that are more disease promoting or inflammatory are turned on. So inflammatory processes in your body get upregulated, they get turned on when you're in that sedentary state. So lack of movement equals more inflammation in your body. More inflammation in your body leads to chronic degenerative diseases over time. Kind of in the meantime of before you get diagnosed with something like a diabetes or a heart disease or a cancer, this is the stuff that you talked about, right? I just kind of feel sick. I feel tired. I'm fatigued. I'm not sleeping well. I can't think properly. My memory seems to be sliding. All of these things kind of slowly happen over time. And it's just kind of how much inflammation is happening in your body. To kind of go something that's kind of connected or even like a precursor to that sort of thing is stuff that we talk about all the time, is this insulin resistance piece to it, or metabolic inflexibility, meaning that your body isn't very good at using fat and sugar for energy. It's primarily your body's set up to store energy. So if your body's always storing energy, of course, that's what leads to people gaining weight.
Right.
But it also just throws off your physiology. In every system, from your ability to detox, your digestive system, your immune system, which of course is a huge thing right now, cardiovascular system, respiratory system, all those things, if your body is not using energy properly, it's going to decrease in function over time. Decrease in function over time leads to sickness and disease. So I don't know exactly if that's what you were hoping for me to say, but that's
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
The inflammation piece is huge. So when you hear a lot about being anti-inflammatory right now, and most people think that is primarily just due to food, that's a huge part of it, right? Food is something that we bring in from the outside to the inside, and it can inflame us. It turns on these pro-inflammatory processes. In some food, the avoiding of certain foods as well as eating some foods activate anti-inflammatory processes. So there is a lot to the diet. But what a lot of people don't know is that movement is also anti-inflammatory.
Right.
I don't remember when this was, but this was when we were doing our Restoring Human podcast. We did some sort of a show where we have people ask questions, and somebody asked about like, what can I take for my arthritis that I had? And I said, well, the main thing you want to do is move. Right. Which is kind of counterintuitive because when I move, it hurts. Right. If somebody has this arthritis, but movement is what your joints are supposed to do, which makes them healthier in the long run and prevents arthritis. So again, that osteoarthritis is just a sign or a symptom of that movement deficiency syndrome that we talked about in the beginning. So if you want to not just kind of minimize the pain that you're feeling, which is, where, taking supplements and stuff can be helpful, it's actually figuring out how to get those joints in alignment and to get those joints moving properly, which some of that we'll get into in these follow-up shows of just being able to get to your physical potential and movement and all that stuff. But it's back to that inflammation. It's back to that insulin resistance. It's back to being able to use energy instead of storing energy. All of those things are important.
Pardon the interruption, folks, but I need to tell you about a phenomenal free resource we have available to you. It is a fantastic resource on how to fight COVID. Dr. Alex took our philosophy on how to obtain health by giving the body what it needs and staying away from what it doesn't, and applied it directly to this issue and crisis of the coronavirus. The media's been telling you there is an invisible enemy surrounding us that you should fear because it's capable of wildly destructive things. We do not believe this is the way life is meant to be lived. We also believe that winning this war against the invisible enemy is far more about how happy, healthy, and strong we are as people, and less about how dangerous our enemy is. If you can get healthy, you can have the confidence to start living life without fear of this virus. We help people work towards health every single day, and we want to help you too. Just go to newcity.fitness/COVID for our free resource on how to fight COVID. Now, back to the show. Yeah. So a lot of these topics within this movement category, they're gonna kind of weave in and out of each other. But since you went with the arthritis thing, one of the things that we're doing here in the gym right now and kind of starting to have the conversation around and talk much more specifically about and really address some bigger issues is just the issue of pain, right? People are in pain, and the kind of issue of arthritis, understanding like, hey, actually movement is a huge piece of this, and just any musculoskeletal issue, right? Like what we're doing in the context of the gym, in the context of strength and conditioning, is like, this is really the place to solve a lot of those problems.
Yeah.
Right? So when we talk about pain, there's kind of four steps that we really need to understand. We need to understand and kind of 4 words to define terms on. Starting with what you just call insult, right? So insult is this just unconscious input, right? So like my shirt is insulting my skin, right?
Yeah.
It's like I have this input. The floor is insulting my feet, right? Mm-hmm. It's like I'm not like it's there. Like there's input there. It's like I'm not like, as we're talking here, I'm not thinking about like how the floor is interacting with my feet, but it's like now that I think about it, like, oh, it's there. Kind of step 2 is actually irritation, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, okay, as soon as I start to think about the input from my feet, or even like the fact that I'm standing, the load that I'm putting down on the floor, bringing back up into my feet and up into all the rest of my joints standing here, it's like, okay, now like potentially there's going to be some irritation added in there, right? So It's like, if I were to say, hey, right where you're at, stop, sit still, 90 minutes, don't move, right? At some point, that input is going to cause you some blanking on my words here. Irritation, right? And now you're going to need to start fidgeting and start moving, right?
Yeah.
Pain is the emotional response that we have to irritation, right? So now, like, something that like is as common and as simple as if I told you to sit in a chair for a long period of time. Like if you've ever gone for a long car ride, you know this feeling of this lack of movement, like your body naturally wants you to do something else, right?
Yeah.
Pain is then what's happening in my head associated to this irritation, right? Granted, like there's absolutely varying degrees of irritation, right? It's significantly different if I punch you in the face versus if you, like a fly lands on your face, right? Like there's absolutely varying degrees there, but the pain is really associated with like how I'm responding to that. And so then the fourth, when we're talking about injury, now this is when I have gotten to the point where it's I can't. Right. I can't move in that certain way. I don't put deodorant on with that arm. I do both armpits with this arm, right? Like that is when we've gotten to when the pain, when the emotional response to the thing has gotten us to the point where now like injury is like this actual belief, right? Yeah. When what you just said, the reality is we actually need to experience that pain to some degree, right? Not saying we need to be 10 out of 10, right? But like we need to very articulately deal with 4 out of 10.
Yeah. To
do the work necessary, right? To get to 0 out of 10.
Yeah.
Right? But it's like there's a huge internal emotional piece that's wrapped up into some of these negative side effects of a sedentary life.
Right. Yeah, something I thought about while you're saying that, and I hope it's connected, otherwise on a rabbit trail, but so that first kind of level that you talked about where it's kind of unconscious, that we're not thinking about the shirt that's on my body right now or our feet on the ground. We're not conscious of that, but obviously our brain. So if we think about what's called neurophysiology, just how your nervous system works, your brain being part of your nervous system, like your brain always knows that that's happening.
Right.
Why it knows that that's happening is because there's something called proprioception being given from your body back to your brain, and then your brain communicates back to the body to make change, basically to adapt to things. So that's always happening. But when you come up with some sort of a stressor, think about, like, if I touch a hot stove, like that's harmful to the body. So what do? We pull back because it's painful.
Right.
What's happening is that's changing that proprioceptive information to the brain, or what's called mechanoreception, which is, think movement when you hear mechanoreception. And it's giving something called nociception, which is basically a pain signal.
Yeah.
So one of the, again, just another argument for why movement is important is if you want to be in pain all the time, then you want nociception going to your brain.
Right.
But if you don't want to be in pain, then you want mechanoreception going to your brain.
Right.
And in order to get mechanoreception going to your brain, you have to move. So think about it. Here's just an easy way. Like when you do that, like when you touch it, what do most people do?
Shake it off.
So they're that does nothing for what you just did.
Right.
All it does is gives a signal to the brain that's different than pain.
Right.
So that's kind of just an easy way of understanding, well, I want more movement to my brain. So to add to this, they know that the brain basically is nourished. So they call this proprioception a nutrient, similar like we would say vitamin A, vitamin D, those type of things. And it's the most important nutrient for your brain to stay healthy long term. So if you want to be healthy into your 80s, 90s with a sharp brain, it's getting it more proprioception, less nociception.
Yeah.
And the way that you get it the most proprioception is through movement.
Yeah.
And I can make a huge argument for chiropractic at this point, but I won't. Let's just stick with the movement. But proprioception, mechanoreception comes from movement. So if we just even think about your brain, you want your brain to survive and thrive, which most people would completely disconnect from exercise or any sort of movement, right?
Yeah.
They think, again, I'm moving because I want to burn calories so that I cannot be fat.
Right.
You have to move if your brain is going to stay healthy.
Right.
Otherwise, it's going to slowly degenerate over time. And that's not because, your genetics necessarily. It's because you're not moving. It's the environments you're putting your body in.
So this is where all the Wim Hof stuff comes into play.
Sure.
Like people being able to go like right now, it's 30 degrees outside, be able to go jump in that freaking river that's like maybe not frozen over yet, like, and sit there for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're able to control like what is happening in their mind, how they're perceiving this irritation, right? And not letting it become this essentially emotional freak out state, like I'm about to die.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
When you can control that and basically remove that response, like the physiology that's happening there, like is not enough on its own to kill you.
Right.
Right. And actually, through hormetic effect and what we'll get to with like the body being physically challenged, like the stress and then the recovery from that breeds this adaptation that ends up getting you stronger.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
It's crazy. It's crazy. So, but we talk about this like emotional tie to all this stuff because it's arguably a bigger problem than the physical, right? We just demonstrated how like you can overcome some crazy physical things with being in a strong emotional state, right? Mm-hmm. The truth is, a weak physical state is breeding a really weak and vulnerable emotional state for a lot of people, right? People are not just unhappy with their appearance, unhappy with how they look or feel or perform. Like there's a piece of life that is pulled away when you feel like my life sentence is sitting on the sidelines and observing things out there that I can't participate in.
Right.
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 We do not believe that is how life was intended to be lived. We also don't believe that you should just make compromises and say, oh, I can't go kick around the soccer ball with my kids. We'll play the Nintendo soccer game instead, right?
Right.
Like we don't believe that life should require that kind of compromise to be made, right? Again, digging into the other principles, we should have access to the full physical potential of the embodied human being, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a philosophical problem with it that life's not meant to be lived this way.
Sure.
So, knowing that, enter in an industrial solution to industrial problems, right? Like it's pretty unrealistic. Not pretty unrealistic. Most people are not going to go back to the life of a homestead, right? Like, yeah, there's kind of some popularity with it for some folks now, like getting back to doing that stuff, and I think there's tons of benefit to it, right? But I think what we need to probably a scalable solution to the problem at scale, right, is probably looks a little different, right? And I think that's really what we're trying to accomplish in the gym.
Yeah.
Okay, nobody ever needed to lift weights or learn how to press something or pull something or run or do any of these things. This is a modern problem, right? So it requires a modern solution. We got to have this space. We got to have these four walls that inside of which we teach people how to do these things. We do it in a pretty systematized way to be able to combat the problems created by sedentary lifestyle. Like that's what we're doing here.
Right.
This place only exists because you are not working in the fields. You're not freaking blacksmith forging swords and tools and whatever, right? It's like this exists because most people work with their brains all day and not their bodies.
Right.
Right.
Right. But I think, so on that point, I think this kind of shows the importance of what we're trying to do with this place as opposed to just kind of being a gym, because you can have that. So you've lost this, I'm active throughout my day. So of course we have to now respond to that. I think what the response has been for however long, last 50 years, is, oh, I know that exercise is important, so I'm going to not move all day, and then I'm going to exercise for 30 minutes, or I'm going to exercise for an hour, and then I'm going to go back to not moving. But what we're trying to teach people is that, number one, exercise is just a piece of this healthy lifestyle, but it's also just a piece of this movement category. We can't rely on just the hour that you're here in these four walls, if you want to be healthy there. I had another thought, but I can't remember.
Yeah, I mean,
where I was going.
The gym is necessary. At this point in life, at this point in history, the gym is necessary, right? And it's like that has definitely been bastardized.
Yeah.
Like, we also believe that, like, the gym is not life, right? Life happens outside the gym. There's some cool things that have happened because of people, like, really pursuing, you know, how far can we take this, right? Like, we enjoy watching the CrossFit games, but, like, that's this little piece of fun that has come out of this, right? Yeah. The gym exists for you to thrive outside of it, right?
I thought of what I was thinking about. This is to kind of give some credit to our friend AC.
Oh.
So Alex Connors, who programs for the gym, I've heard him say, and maybe I'm representing him here, but I think his argument is that if you want to be healthy, you have to start with being not necessarily a gym member, but start with exercising. Meaning exercise is kind of this gateway to all the other principles that we would say of health. Like if you look at people, and I can, I think I would be on board with him with this when I look at the people that I've tried to take care of for the past 10 years of my practice. Like if you look at somebody who's like interested in nutrition and looks at, okay, I need to think about what I'm eating, it's still a big struggle for those people to actually exercise. It seems to be easier for people who want to come in, unless you're like, a young dude who's just really here to compete type of stuff. The people who are like coming to the gym and are getting engaged in the community, those people are much more prone to start doing things differently with their nutrition. They're starting to, think about the other aspects of their health. So this kind of the people that seem to maybe have, I guess, just the mindset that exercise is important, and then they actually do it. They follow that up with action. That kind of leads them into doing other things that are necessary for your health. And maybe it's just because of the difficulty in exercise. People don't like how hard it is. But if you start with some other aspect of health, it's difficult. And I laid it out in the beginning. Like I was doing all these other aspects of health, but exercise was the most difficult thing for me to do. Yeah. It's hard to get in there if you don't kind of start there. And so that's just another argument for why this gym we think is important.
Yeah, right. That's my own story, right?
Sure.
Like it took getting into the garage gym for me to be able to like that was the catalyst. Right, that was a catalyst for me to start to see, okay, like I've been active in my life up until this point. Like I've played sports, I've been in the weight room, right? It didn't solve my problem, right? That alone was not enough. It was, okay, this now finally got paired with some decent nutritional advice, right? Hey, there's this thing called the Paleo Diet, right? You're not going to eat any grains, any dairy, any sugar, right? You're going to primarily eat meat and vegetables, nuts and seeds, some fruit, little starch, and no sugar, right? Here's your new diet, right? Okay, great. Blindly follow those very simple rules. Basically, eat real food as much as you want.
Yeah.
That was where I started, right? And that alone, right? And getting a good movement practice that I actually stuck to, plus now some decent, like, point in the right direction nutritionally. Holy cow, I started to experience some change.
Right.
And then I start to see, like, oh, like, this whole CrossFit methodology and the movement, like, what they're really trying to get after is what is optimal for the human being, right? Not just, we got to move, we got to do something, right? Hip hop abs DVD, right? Like, no. Like, we're trying to look at, like, what's the human supposed to do, right? And then the paleo diet, like, the thought behind it. Let's look back at times when people didn't experience the negative health outcomes that we experience now. What did those people eat? Oh, maybe this diet is actually what the human being is supposed to eat, right? And so that mentality of, like, actually, like, let's put some thought into all other areas of life. That's what has gotten me to reach into all these deep, dark corners and say, we can say something about that.
Yep.
Yep. It's Catalyst. It's the gym.
It's the gym.
Cool. Sweet, folks. Yeah, we've got exciting stuff going on here. We are constantly trying to figure out how to serve people better, how to, like, bridge the gap that exists from the solutions that we know we can offer to you, and, like, people understanding that, people, like, not being intimidated, right? We changed the name, right? Because of that, we're willing to do some pretty big things to be able to reach people we know we can help. So if that's you, we would love to talk to you. newcity.fitness/start. Schedule time to come and talk to us. We would love to hear from you.
Adios.
Folks, thank you very much. If you can hear my voice now, this means that you made it. You did it. You listened all the way through the show. You didn't shut it off. You didn't stop it. You're probably sick of me by now, but shoot, I owe you a thank you. This is a quick reminder. If you missed it earlier, there's a great resource available to you. Go to newcity.fitness/COVID. Download our free resource on how to fight COVID. We made it for you. We want you to see it. We think it'll be very valuable to you. That's it for now. You can catch us on Instagram and Facebook. Join our group on Facebook. And hey, if you're ready, you're like, I don't need all that other stuff. Just let's go. Let's get started. Great. Go to newcity.fitness/start. Schedule time to come in and talk to one of our coaches. Until next time.